Good evening. It is your tired midnight blogger. What blogs in this case at 8:32 p.m. I don't know how long I'm going to be on here, but I just felt the need to come on. So there it is. Um, I might get a sudden interruption because if somebody calls, I'm going to just stop what I'm doing and take the call. But I wanted to talk some more about the the present state of young men and Robert Bly and Iron John, and whether or not there's any solution to be found in that book. I'm not going to belabor the point too much, partly because YouTube will censor me if I say the wrong things, and partly because I want to get to the good stuff fairly quickly, but I've found that often you can get away with more stuff after 8 minutes than you can in the first 8 minutes. So I'm going to present The Never Married. It's a new normal. And I married late, so some of these things I actually understand. But things are profoundly, I don't know about worse, but different than they were back in my day. The Never Married from Psychology Today. Fry and Parker of the Pew Research Center reported in 2021, 38% of adults were found to be unpartnered, as compared to 29% in 1990. Statistics driven predominantly by a decline in marriage. Indeed, over the past 50 years, the marriage rate has dropped by approximately 60%. In 2021, 47.35 million men were never married, as compared to 41.81 million women. And according to data from the Institute for Family Studies in the last 2 decades, the number of never married individuals has risen from 21% to 35%, a 14 percentage point increase. Now, I know that statistics are boring, but I think that it's definitely something to point out. I don't know the truth of this, but a lot of your so-called red pill or what have you sites, and I know they're controversial, but a lot of them will claim that marriage is at an all-time low. I've also heard that male testosterone is at an all-time low. There are serious rates of certain mental conditions that YouTube will not allow me to talk about in a serious fashion, and I refuse to say the word that is usually used for it, so you'll have to read between the lines. But something is going on, and I personally feel like it's been building probably throughout most of my dad's life, let alone mine. He's 87. I remember him telling me stories about school and how all the teachers hated boys. Maybe he was overly sensitive, but it's always kind of stuck with me that he felt a little bit of what I felt. I felt more of what he felt. Not that the teachers hated me. I actually had a really good school. So that wasn't it. I just felt like there was a culture that was more and more antagonistic toward men. And I think that that has grown exponentially since my time. The causes of never marrying, according to Wang, who is Wang? Can't be Wang Chung. It's a study. Okay, it's the one that was cited from the 21 to 35%. The causes are young adults are taking more time to marry, which, I mean, it makes sense. It's taken one, we're all scared of divorce. Twilight was silly in a lot of ways, but it also it made a point. If you think about it, her goal was to spend eternity as a vampire with this guy. She wasn't scared of that, but she was scared of marriage. And some people feel like that's foolish, but I rather think that there's a poetic point there. There's something to be said about even just the possibility that a woman might think that. Hello, Dad Man Walking. Thank you for saying hi. I'm just glad you're here. I am mainly just streaming for therapeutic purposes. But thank you very much for being here, and feel free to comment if you wish about the current state of young men. Cohabitation has become a popular alternative, and I'm not going to be judgy on that. But I know that basically people feel like the traditions have failed them, and so now they're trying to do things outside of the traditions. Possibly this is a good thing, bad thing. Comments are welcome. Lower income individuals are now less likely to marry. Starting a family is an expensive proposition. I wish I could get the point in the video, but one of the What is Alt History, one of his videos talks about how the dollar, basically the income that a young man has nowadays relative to someone from the 50s or 60s is about 20%. And, you know, I assume that it's likely half of what it was in my time. It was hard enough in my time. I can only imagine, and it's basically crushing nowadays. At the risk of saying too much online, there's someone that I'm getting more, I'm thinking more about, and sometimes the thought crosses my mind. Well, what if we get to that point? You know, oh, that man walking, I can't write. It's too complicated. Don't communicate. Don't want to tell you what's going on at work. Oh, I'm so sorry, Dad Man Walking. I too am having some work frustrations. Part of why I'm anxious, which is part of why I'm on here, to try to calm myself down with talking. We'll see how well that works, but it does actually seem to help. This community has been wonderful. I love you guys, and it does seem to calm me down. I thought about going into someone else's live stream, but I feel the need to be voicing something instead of consuming something. Women prefer a man who is financially stable. When unemployment rates rise, the number of eligible men shrinks. But I think that's nearly always been true. Oh, yes, Dead Man Walking. Many more examples. That's why I leave there. And Squirrel Stream. Man, if I could get away with it, but I can't. I have to basically run from place to place and do my best to make a sale. Oh, man, it's brutal. It's brutal. Okay, we're past the 8-minute mark, so I can say show some things. One of the elements that's going on is that men often feel like they have been controlled in their past. Now, if men feel like they've been controlled, that's either their father, their mother, an ex, somebody. Talk away, just guard your privacy, talking code. Yeah, I do need to be less obvious. And hello, JPRPH, you are the man. Thank you very much for showing up here. I don't know how long I'm going to be here, somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour and 20 minutes. I don't know. Basically, when I get through with all these points, or until the person who I am thinking so much about clause, whichever comes first. Essentially, I'm going to make it a little bit personal. I felt extremely controlled, both by my parents, specifically mainly by my mother, and by my ex-wife. And so I feel a deep connection with the young men out there. It seems to me that I used to be an aberration, and now a man like me seems to be the norm for those that are under 30. And I want to do the little bit that I can to help them out. So that's why I'm talking here. I'm going to present something else and move on to my next sharing thing. Hopefully I don't get dinged for this, but I don't think. I think if I'm smart enough to chop it up if it gets too long. Fight Club made the point very well back in the day. Let's make sure I'm sharing it. Yes, I am. So there it is. Hopefully YouTube, it didn't destroy me for that 1 minute. That resonated a lot with me back in the day, and that film's been, what has it been, 25, almost, maybe almost 30 years. No, I don't know, but it's been quite a while. The men who are now pushing 30 were born when it was made, and it just baffles me. The point was known, the point was made back then, and it seems like we have done little to nothing to make it any different or any better. I guess the next thing I'm going to share, the next thing I'm going to share is the book of Robert Bly himself, Iron John. Since I've had my own struggles, there have been good and kind men who've shared with me what they did, what helped them. And one of them had shared with me a book called Wild at Heart. And Wild at Heart was a Christian book about being men. And it was mildly helpful, although, to be honest, not terribly so. But he shared a lot of sightings from Robert Bly and Iron John. And I've done some studying on Jungian psychology and the archetypes of manhood, and how we need to basically we go through most of those archetypes, if I can remember them correctly, and maybe I can't. There's the lover, the king, the jester, and the shaman magic user. At one time in our life, we tend to be one of each of them, or basically we touch bases on all of them. And Robert Bly, he really connects with that, and he takes a fairy tale and dissects it and makes it into more or less a diagnosis. I don't know if people have the patience for me to read. How many pages is this? If it's too long, I won't read the whole thing, but at least I'll read the first part of it, if that is okay. There was once upon a time a king who had near his castle an enormous forest in which wild animals of all sorts lived. Hey, have a good and dad man walking. Thank you very much for showing up. One day, he dispatched a hunter into those woods to take a deer, but the hunter did not return. Something went wrong out there, said the king, and the next day sent 2 more hunters out to search for the first, but they did not return either. And the third day he called all his huntsmen in and said, "Scour the entire forest and stay at it until you found all three of them." Not a one of those hunters ever returned, and moreover, the pack of dogs that went out with him never came back either. No one after that dared to enter the forest and let it be in its deep stillness and solitude. And I don't know what I did to my phone, but it keeps wanting to run timers. I don't know what is up with that. It's really getting on my nerves. So, okay. And if anyone is interested, I know one of our friends is doing a live stream about a review of the X-Men 97 series. If that interests you more than this, please feel free to go see him. If I was smart enough, I would probably, I probably can do this. Yes, let's get his link up in here. I know that it's probably silly to tell people to go see something else, but just in case this is boring to you, our friend Mikey Susie 4 is also doing something. So hello, Connie Cleary, you are welcome here. Thank you very much for showing up and hopefully listening to a little bit of my bizarre rantings about the state of men. Right now, I am doing the fascinating thing of reading the story of Iron John. So this forest has been a deadly place. Nobody's been able to do anything about it. Nobody wants to go there. It's not safe. The situation went on for years, and then one day a hunter appeared who wanted work to do. The king, he offered to set foot in the dangerous woods, but the king refused to consent, saying, "It is not safe in there. I have the feeling that you will end up like the others, and this is the last we'll see of you." The hunter replied, "Sire, I'm well aware of the risk, and fear is something I pay no attention to." Man, talk about, the original Man Without Fear, before there was Green Lantern, before there was Daredevil, there was the random hunter in the story of Iron John. The hunter took his dog with him and walked into the forest. It wasn't long before the dog picked up the scent of game and went in pursuit, but he had hardly run 3 steps before he stood at the edge of a deep pool and could go no further. A naked arm reached out of the water, grabbed hold of him, and pulled him down. Oh, yes, you're very welcome. I gave you a wrench, I gave Lady of the Elements a wrench, and I gave Thade a wrench. And who knows who else will get one by the time I've got all this figured out. There just may be wrenches galore throughout the land. When this hunter saw that, and I'm glad that they did this for story consistency, because I kind of wondered when I first read it, how in the world are people going to know that this happened? The hunter saw that, went back to the castle, got 3 men who came with pails, and they bucketed out the water. When they got down to the ground, they saw a wild man lying there, whose body was as brown as rusty iron. His hair hung down from his head over his face and all the way to his knees. They tied him with cords and led him back to the castle. At the castle, there was great astonishment over this wild man, and the king had him locked up in an iron cage that he had placed in the courtyard, and he forbade anyone, on pain of death, to open the locked door. He gave the key into the keeping of the queen. Once that had been done, people could go safely into the forest once more. The king had an 8-year-old son. We finally get to the main character, just 20 minutes into the story, who one day was playing in the courtyard, and during that play, his golden ball fell down into the cage. The boy ran to the cage and said, "Give me my golden ball." "Not until you've opened the door for me," the man answered. "Oh no," said the boy, "I can't do it. The king won't let me." And he ran away. The next day, the boy returned and asked for his ball again. Basically, it's the typical fairy tale trope. He comes back on the third day. While the king was out hunting, the boy came once again and said, "Even if I wanted to, I couldn't open the door because I don't have the key." The wild man said, "The key is under your mother's pillow. You can retrieve it." The boy, who really did want his ball back, threw caution to the winds, went to the castle, and got the key. The cage door was not easy to open, and the boy flinched or pinched his finger. When the door stood open, the wild man walked through it, gave the boy the golden ball, and hurried away. The boy suddenly felt great fear. He shouted and cried out after him, "Wild man, if you go away, they will beat me." And back when children were still beaten, and I guess they still are, the wild man wheeled around, lifted the boy onto his arms, onto his shoulders, and walked with brisk steps into the forest. When the king returned, he noticed the empty cage and inquired of the queen how the wild man had gotten loose. She knew nothing about it, went to check the key, and found it gone. She called the boy, but got no answer. The king sent a search party out into the fields, but they did not find the boy. It wasn't difficult to guess what had happened, and great grief and mourning settled on the royal house. That's the first part of the fairy tale. I won't read the whole thing because I would just bore you to tears, and I don't know that I would get through it in a timely fashion. I want to get into the analysis. There's a ton of Freudian things here, and unpacking it, I don't know if I can do it justice. That's the whole point of the book, Iron John, but I'm going to try to at least unpack a little bit of this. For that, I'm going to share maybe I won't. Oh yes, here it is. So I tried to find a decent article about the stealing of the key. This was one of the better ones. Still not great, but it was one of the better ones that I could find. I didn't want to dive into Robert Bly's videos because they're long, they're voluminous, and I have experience with YouTube, taking my videos down. So I don't want to just make this a big thing where I share a bunch of stuff and then it's gone. Stealing the key from under the mother's pillow is the same image as, according to this gentleman, Sam Sleeman, who is a shamanic storyteller. That may chase some of you away. I actually am good with that. That would actually be a great. Well, hello, Putin's cat. You didn't miss much. I read the first part of the fairy tale, The Iron John. I don't know whether you'll enjoy this one or not, but I talked a little bit about the state of men, but we had already discussed a lot of that in a previous stream, and you probably know a great deal about it already. And then I got to talking about my own searches for answers, and one of the answers, possibly, at least that's proposed, is the book Iron John, a book about men by Robert Bly. I know it was highly recommended by the Christian writer who wrote Wild at Heart, which was a Christian book for helping men out. So this shaman stealing the key from under the mother's pillow is the same image as Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mankind. The theft is an act of defiance toward the status quo at the risk of losing your mother's love. Now, I don't know what everyone else's experience is, but I literally had to run away from home. And that's probably a little bit shocking to hear, because if you saw me and listening to me, you probably think I'm some wimp who wants to please everybody. But things were so bad, I ran away from home. And I was very fortunate. I didn't live in a city, I lived in a small town. If I'd lived in a city, things probably would have gone very badly. And they still did go pretty badly, but not nearly as badly as they could have. The small town's solution to all this was to put me up with my pastor, who, God bless him, kept me for a year, and then the rest is history. But the reason I bring all that up is even in the healthy relationships, the child has to break free from the parent. They have to not necessarily rebel per se, but they have to find their own life. They have to find their own world. And then obviously when your parents are truly abusive, you have to, I'm not saying that everyone should run away like I did, but you have to find a way to break away from that unhealthiness. And that is basically the theft of the key in that fairy tale. To steal the key and to steal it from under the mother's pillow is to separate ourselves from the indoctrination of the status quo. Perhaps to understand the enormity of this task, we need to understand the status quo as the construct that it is. And he refers to some things that I won't go into right now. I don't want to test your patience quite that much. But the key that unlocks the wild man's cage, I mean, this basically the losing of the ball. In other words, the loss of the naivety of youth, and also the concurrent joy, because you don't realize how hard the world is. That's the beginning of the boy's journey to being a man, according to this story. And then he goes against the status quo. He steals. He doesn't ask his mother nicely. He steals the key and then unlocks the wild man's cage. Now, we all know in real life, it would be the dumbest thing in the world to unlock a wild man's cage when you're an 8-year-old boy. You want to keep him in there. You don't know what he's going to do. But the point of the story is that you actually have to accept. Doesn't mean you necessarily let it reign over your life, but you have to accept the wildness that's in you, and you have to let it out at least enough to break away from your parents. The key given over by the king to the queen for safekeeping, to keep the wild man contained and safely bound within the cage in the courtyard of the castle. The status quo likes to find out who is at fault, prosecute them, imprison them. Now we are safe. The perpetrator is locked up and we don't have to account for our part in the crime. At a personal level, the key is coming face to face with our privileges, advantages, rank, assumptions, and prejudices. Mothering as the socializing function of our culture teaches the young child what it needs to know to successfully navigate the community that we live in. Our education system then takes over on behalf of the status quo and continues not an education, but in many cases an indoctrination. The indoctrination is done at the expense of the soul. Empathy, connection, and feelings which are functions of soul are lost. So when things go wrong, we get a deer in the headlight response. More laws and regulations are passed to compensate for the unintended consequence of antisocial behavior. And there's also, I don't agree with absolutely everything that he says. Sometimes antisocial behavior is just someone who really does need to be locked away. But I've noticed that we live in a world that barely knows a rule that it doesn't like. It's a weird dichotomy. On one hand, you have 100 laws, and at any given time, you're breaking one, no matter what you're doing. And you have all these corporate policies, and at any given time, you're breaking one. But then on the other hand, we want all this wildness. We have videos that, I probably sound like a Christian fundamentalist now, but we have videos on the Super Bowl or whatever it was with Satan and demonesses worshiping him. We want wildness to excess, but then we have rules out the yin yang. The article then makes the comparison of Leo and the Matrix. I won't go into that, but essentially, the long and the short of it is, in order to become a man, and this sadly is something I didn't learn until late, maybe too late, but you have to steal that key. You have to get away. I stole the key enough to run away, but then after I ran away, I tamed myself because I was scared of what other people would think. I mean, when somebody knows that you're a runaway, doesn't that mean you're dangerous? Doesn't that mean you might steal? Well, I never did, but I know a lot of runaways probably do have to steal or feel they have to steal in order to survive. And they become wild and dangerous. I rarely tell anybody that I've ran away from home, because I don't want them to be scared. But at the end of the day, to be a man is at least a little bit to be scary. That wild man's got to be a little bit of a part of you. I'm going to now present part of a video. How wounded boys become men, because an essential part of that story is an opening that cage. The boy wounds his finger, and it becomes a very important plot point later on. And Robert Bly believes that it's a very important part of becoming a man. I'm going to share this video and let him do some of the talking, but also do some of my own random commentary. Thank you for being patient. I know that this is probably a little dry. Here we go.
Never been shown the life-changing power of their pain and their adversity, they will never be able to overcome it and become the strongest version of themselves. As a culture, we seem to have given up on the notion of the overcoming of adversity as key to the formation of masculine energy in a man. If you're not being fed the contemporary notion of masculinity as cruel and unfeeling, you're left with a 1950s archetypal bully in today's cultural conversation. Both of these conceptions are leaving men with nowhere to turn, as neither of these amounts to an integrated, awakened man. But what is an integrated man? This question have been as effective, heartfelt, and expect me down many rabbit holes.
And that really is the question. I've wrestled with that all of my life. What in the name of heck is an enlightened man? And I don't know if I actually said hello to you, Putin's cat. I just said that you didn't miss much, but I don't know that I said hello. Pardon me for being a little bit of a wild man there and not actually saying hello to one of my guests. Thank you for saying hello, Connie Clearing. You're the best. But essentially, that's the answer. And yes, a fairy tale is largely, in many people's minds, just for entertainment, but there's deep psychological, spiritual truths that can also be taken from a lot of them. Let's see what this gentleman, awakened man, has to say.
Holes over the years, from feminism to red pill movements, But none of these have been as effective, heartfelt, and experientially true as the path of masculine formation as laid out in Robert Bly's classic book, Iron John, a book about men. Iron John was originally a Germanic mythic tale about an animalistic, rugged wild man who's captured by a king and unwittingly freed by a naive prince. While there remains a great threat that the boy prince will be killed by the wild man, instead he ends up learning from his raw, naturalistic energy, learning how to face fear and process his trauma along the way. Now,
And hello, Sashi, the man from the future. Maybe I shouldn't assume that. But the person from the future. We're actually talking, I'm still talking about the state of young men, mostly young men, also some of us old farts, and talking about Robert Bly, Iron John, and how at least some of us may find some hope in that. I think he has Mastery by Robert Greene up on his bookshelf. That's awesome. I haven't finished that book yet. So, if that is interesting, if it's not, well, I understand that. But let's continue the video.
this story carries such relevance today because the boy prince acts as a symbol for modern man. Today, we're sheltered from the brutality of reality by the walls of safe society, distanced from the grit and guts of our forefathers who built the societies we live in, and most often enmeshed in the all-consuming love of the Great Mother archetype. The Great Mother archetype may come in the form of a closeness to an actual mother without the corresponding closeness to the father, or it could even be a symbolic closeness to the feminine in terms of yin energy. Either way, both of these clash with the inner masculine instincts of the boy and create a dysfunction in later life. And while it's of course healthy for men to have an understanding of and a blending with the feminine, our modern world seems to offer men and boys few positive, wise archetypes of masculinity to learn from, meaning men have an over-reliance on the feminine. This in turn leads many men to becoming what I term lost boys, that is, men who identify with their ego, who seek hedonism and feel an inner nihilism and purposelessness within. The path of the lost boy inevitably spirals down into an obsession with one's personal status, with chasing women, or with inner dysfunction, addictions, and a lack of deep purpose and vision in life. However, as the tale of Iron John goes to show, we can, if we face the wild man, ensure that we find a positive archetype of masculinity to teach us and mold us and take us to a place of courage, purpose, and vision. Now, the first step of
All right. So essentially, he's laying out what I've been saying, that the fairy tale is a blueprint for, it's basically just an ancient blueprint for how boys become men. One of the things that Robert Bly talks about is how boys used to be initiated into manhood. They would be taken away from their mothers, sometimes for months. And then the elders of the tribe would teach the boy the stories, the traditions, how to hunt and how to fish and all the things that the boy needed to know in those ancient societies. And then there would be an initiation which often involved pain. And I remember as a child, and even as a younger man, thinking, oh my gosh, those terrible heathens, they were hurting and traumatizing these children. And that may or may not be true. But the reason wasn't to traumatize the children. The reason was because until you feel pain, you're really not a man. It's just that simple. Let's see what else this gentleman has to say.
Man must take on this path is integrating the wounds that have stemmed from his relationship with his actual or symbolic father. Many men grow up today without a father figure, or with an emotionally distant one at least, and Robert Bly states that the whole of the remote father leaves a gap in a boy's life that demons can enter through. Anxiety, depression, despair, anger issues, addictions, all of these are examples of demonic entities that can enter the wounded boy's soul. This lack of the physical and spiritual father has led young men to develop what Bly terms female instincts. And while much of society says we need more female influence on boys, I would beg to differ. While young boys do need their mothers for a time, as they get older, boys need their fathers to introduce them to the world as a man. Paraphrasing Carl Jung, Bly states that in developing female instincts, this blocks a man from actualizing himself on the world. It stops him from implementing self discipline and, most fundamentally, makes him struggle with being assertive in the world. Now, many lost boys know this has happened subconsciously and therefore begin resenting their mothers for it. They may say they love their mother dearly. They may not even be consciously aware of the resentment, but look closely and you usually find that they are still their mother's son. Now, harboring hatred towards anybody is extremely dangerous, but it's especially dangerous when it's aimed towards one of your parents, because that traps you as a lost boy in an identity of pain, because your whole character is based upon events that happened in your childhood, meaning you haven't broken free of it. Trapped in a web, many men develop grandiose beliefs and compulsive behaviors to hide their wounds, while others display them like trophies on Twitter. We live in an age of anxiety, trauma, and depression, but it's worth asking, what would some people be and do without these maladies to
Yes, Sashi. Asians grew up with mostly emotionally distant parents, and uh, I don't want to criticize the Asian societies because I don't live in them, and I probably don't understand them very thoroughly. But yes, I have heard at least the stereotype is the cold Oriental parents, and it's very alienating. Now, one of the things I want to point out, it's not to say that we should hate our mothers, be angry toward our mothers, that we can't have a good relationship with them. But the point is, I don't know if this guy is going to talk about it, but Robert Bly talks about how, and I remember this, when you're very young, I at least, and I think a lot of men, maybe not all, but a lot of us, we over identify with the mother. I remember mom being so angry and frankly hateful toward dad. And as a little bitty toddler, I knew mother, she was around all the time. Dad was gone so often. I honestly, sometimes he'd come home and I wouldn't know who he was because he'd been gone for so long. Sashi, all of Asia, that's not true. Many cultures do, but not all. And I'm certain that's true too. I'm certain that's true too. Um, and so, probably for the first 12 years of my life, I had this weird dichotomy. On one hand, I had a hero worship of my dad. I put him right next to Superman or Samson, and I was always saying, "Yeah, Dad can do this, and Dad can do that." And Dad was actually a very capable man. In fact, frankly, he was way the hell more capable in practical ways than I'll probably ever be. But I over idolized him. But at the same time, I identified with my mother, and if he would just be home more, and if he wouldn't drink so much, and some of that was true, but there was also Dad's story to it, and I never, until I lived it, until I was married, I had no clue whatsoever of what my dad was going through, what he was enduring, what he sacrificed for us. The guy was very flawed, but at the same time, I don't know many people who worked harder for their families. Uh, than he did. And of course, he, still ended up being an alcoholic and kind of destroying the family. But at the core of it was someone who loved us and was honestly trying to do the right thing. He failed in a lot of ways, but that was his intent, was to take care of us. And of course, the mother, even the best of mothers, don't often see it quite the way it really is. Of course, we also have our bad lenses. We see women in a totally different way than they really are. But the point is, at some point, the boy has to have that mother's viewpoint broken. Robert Bly, I definitely wanted to be sure to mention this. He talked about one of the men that he counseled, and his that gentleman's father was very old, and he hadn't hardly talked to him in ages. And one day he went to his elderly father, and he said to him, I now realize that the way mother saw you was totally wrong. And for the first time in the man's life, his father broke down bawling. Now, I've never had that experience, and I won't. He's still alive, but he has dementia. He doesn't even know who I am. So I'll never have that experience, and that's okay. I really don't have to have it. But it was very poignant just to think that his father had gone all that time, making all these mistakes, doing all these things wrong, yes, but still just yearning for the love of his son, and his son denying it, at least in part, not entirely because of, but in part because of that skewed feminine view of what the father really is. Let's go back to the video.
Find them. Others, as happened to me, may well turn to addictive behavior in an attempt to almost obliterate the soul, to bring an ending to the inner pain that they unknowingly perpetuate within. Yet in all the attempts we make to escape inner pain, the solutions do not lie in the external world. They lie in the pain within. Now, it's very important to note in your journey of growth as a man that the aim here isn't to turn into the wild man. It's to interact with the wild man and learn from him, making you half wild man, half civilized man. And while the wild man of Iron John is a poetic metaphor, your own wild man will appear when you take the decisive step away from blaming others, victimhood, and fear. The first step to this is inculcating the great spiritual axiom, and that's that your wounds are gifts. Right now, that may well seem like an insane thing for me to say to you, but when
one other thing that I wanted to bring out. Oh, Putin's cat is rare. Hugging isn't even a thing down here. Public displays of affection are frowned upon. Yeah, my family was like that. Their really emotions were frowned upon, which is odd because both mom and dad were very volatile people. But our emotions as children, that was not supposed to be. You were supposed to rein it all in, curb your enthusiasm. And I'm sure I'm being a little bit unfair. There were plenty of times when that wasn't true, but that was also part of the problem. It was so inconsistent. But I wanted to point out something about the wounds. Earlier, he had said that men often grew up hiding their wounds or wearing them like a badge of honor. Most of my life, I've spent hiding wounds, afraid that people couldn't bear them, couldn't love me when they saw them. But then also there has been the temptation sometimes, and sometimes I succumb to wearing it as a badge of honor. Look at me, I've survived all this stuff. Ooh, I'm bad, but I'm not. I wish I was, but at the end of the day, wounds are just wounds. Now, I haven't gotten this lesson down. The whole thought that our wounds are blessings, that's still percolating around in my mind. I probably should have gotten that lesson down by now, but I haven't. Let's see what else he has to say.
When we look back over our history as humanity, who among us has truly become great without honoring their wounds and pushing through their suffering to find transcendent meaning? Gandhi was great because he was oppressed by and overcame the biggest empire of all time. MLK was great because of the very racism that tormented him physically, emotionally, and spiritually. He morphed in to our growth as a human species. Winston Churchill was great because of the Nazi menace that plowed through Europe and threatened to plunge the whole continent into darkness. Jesus was great because he was tortured and murdered despite never committing a sin even once, and showed the world the power of forgiveness and love as its fundamental root. So if you feel your life has no meaning, that you've been wronged by life, that you feel oppressed, there's one key question that you need to ask yourself. How does my suffering help others? A vital part of being an integrated man is the capability to be honest, stoic, and helpful to others. Part of being this man is also in learning to be part of a meaningful community. The mythological tale of Narcissus, the man that we get the word narcissist from, is very useful here. It's very important to remember that before Narcissus fell in love with himself, he was separated from his tribe. In his loneliness with his wounds, he fell in love with his own image. This is the tale of the man who rejects society in order to stay a lost boy, using grandiosity to hide himself from the world. It's
Yes, Sashi is in Malaysia, Southeast Asia, and Putin's cat, that's not all of Asia, which is a fair point. You have Malay culture, Islam, Russia, Kazakh, China, Japan, Cambodia, India, Afghan. You can't say this is true of all those cultures, and that is true too. I would just like to point out that the second big mistake is to get into a land war in Asia. One of the purposes that I have for this channel, I don't mean to be grandiose here, but that's part of my purpose, is to help wounded people. I don't want anybody to. I mean, it's inevitable. People are going to feel a lot of the same things that I felt, and go through not just what I went through, but much, much, much worse. And that's part of what I would like to do. Whether I'm going to be successful with that, who knows? But I would like for people to be able to find some answers, or if I can't give them answers, maybe we can find those answers together. But I don't always mean to be serious, but in this one, I've kind of felt a seriousness. Putin's cat. Just in China's case recently, there have been poisoning incidents for children, formula, or knife attacks. Parents do care for maybe their only child in many cases. Yeah, I've heard that sometimes the Chinese, because they only get one child, often spoil their children in these times. That may not be true, but that is what I've heard.
It's common for men to fear the tribe because of an evolutionary driver of exclusion. Yet we must fight to overcome that innate fear, as whatever keeps us in the comfort zone will kill us quicker than fear. Staying in the comfort zone is another behavior stemming from the Great Mother, which seeks to always nurture and protect. This may be okay for boys, but men must break free from this. And if society and culture has turned its back on positive masculine archetypes, you must find your own way yourself. This journey of stepping out is the symbolic stride from the mother's world to the father's world. And this step into the father's world begins with a step into the unknown. And it's not so simple as we just enter the unknown and become integrated men immediately. The idea is that we fail, that we stumble, that we keep falling over, that we get knocked from every direction, and we learn to pick ourselves up and stand on our own 2 feet. This journey is truly vital for modern men to make, as women, lost boys, and the world yearn for integrated, brave, and capable men. We learn in this journey the value of persistence, of ambition, of grit, and how by facing adversity consistently, we can find inner peace and contentment within. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do remember to give.
Okay, so that is what he has to say, and I probably agree with a lot of that. But I'm on my own journey, and it is painful. I make so many mistakes, and I get knocked down. So far, I keep getting up. Malaysia has 3 major ethnic groups: the Malays and indigenous that are grouped in Bumiputra. Chinese makes up the 2nd largest group, and the Indians are the 3rd group. That's interesting. I'm going to bring this to a close. Hopefully, people got at least a little bit out of this, or maybe learned something. Possibly not. I agree. Not all Asia is like that. It is more common. But this is one of the central tenets that I'm here for, is to try to make my own journey and help others to make theirs. Or if I'm not able to help them, well, I still have to keep going on. And I'm going to end this with some words from Robert Bly, and then I'm going to thank everyone in the chat and call it a stream.
Written to my father. This is a poem written to my father when he was very old, and this is a poem written to my father when he was very old and ill. Your head is still restless, rolling east and west. That body in you insisting on living is the old hawk for whom the world darkens. If I am not with you when you die, that is just. It's all right. That part of you cleaned my bones more than once, but I will meet you in the young hawk, whom I see inside both you and me. He will guide you to the Lord of Night, who will give you the tenderness you wanted here.
And perhaps not the most profound ending, but as my father is getting close to his passing, and I'm at this weird crossroads in my life, and then I frankly never expect to see my son again. He takes issue with anyone saying all of anything, and that's a fair point. All white, all Asians, all black, all women. Nothing needed. I'm attempting to alter how people chat. And yeah, I too, I don't ever call other people out about it. And it's okay that you do. But part of that discussion that I had, I hate showing my wounds. I don't call people out very much. But at the same time, I absolutely agree with you in principle that saying all of X, Y, or Z is very rarely a correct thing to do. He uses the word generally. Sashi Punskata streaming Galactica reboot, and then Amazon keeps playing ads. Oh gosh. It's fantastic that you're streaming Galactica reboot. That's probably where I should have been instead of doing this. Boots Cat, Sashi, I apologize. That's that's a real man right there. He's able to apologize. Sashi, no problem, buddy. I'm not an absolutist either. So there we go. Maybe a example of two men showing their spirit, but yet also showing their brotherhood. That's fantastic. I couldn't have planned that better if I'd wanted to. You two, you're wonderful men, or wonderful people anyway, and I'm proud to have you in this community. Maybe a little bit abrupt, but I'm going to call it a stream. I want to have a little bit of energy left to talk to this woman that I have been romancing in my rather rather worn out way. But thank you, Dadman Walking, for showing up here, and JPRPH, thank you for showing up. Connie Cleary, as always, thank you for showing up and being the wrench lady of YouTube. Putin's Cat, thank you so much for showing up. You always have good, insightful things to say. Sometimes you challenge us, but you know, that's okay. Sometimes we need challenge. And Sashi, thank you very much. I love that you're here. I love that there's somebody who's not just a Westerner, and that's not to, you know, poo-poo anybody, but it's always good, I think, to have a diversity of perspective. The only part of the whole multicultural thing that we're doing anymore that I actually think is valuable is that idea of diversity. Oh, wait, what do we got? Hope the stream helped you along your way. Appreciate your sharing. Hang in there. Much respect for you not giving up, continuing to try to figure things out. I'll keep trying until it's over, or until I lose my mind, whichever comes first. Don't ask me for romance tips. Too out of practice, and sadly, Sashi, so am I. I'm actually appalled. It's been a couple of years, and I'm appalled that I've forgotten so much of what I learned so painfully. So, anyway, there it is. The state of men, of young men, is dire, and part of it is that we have been raised, not necessarily my generation, but we're more and more being raised by women who, God bless them. I'm not saying that they're bad, but the boy needs a male perspective, and all too often doesn't get one. And there it is. See you later. I know that Thade is wanting to talk about ancient civilizations at 9:30 on Saturday. And somewhere between now and then, I'll probably have a random post of my own about probably more stuff about Robert Bly, Iron John, unless the community would like something else, which is absolutely fine. Thank you very much for showing up. Thank you for listening to me. And I hope all of you have a wonderful evening.